Say there's this couch that you really, really love and you have had your eye on it and you go back to the website like 2 or 3 times a day. This couch is going to fix everything. You know what I mean? Like when you cross that line, that's lust. And like, we don't think about lust that way.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. Well, hello, everybody. I'm so glad to have two people that I love and admire and respect. Chris Gordon, who is the co-founder of At His Feet Studies and a visiting instructor at Covenant Theological Seminary. She's author of numerous Bible studies focusing on women. She's an excellent speaker, a favorite of the women in my family, if I can be blunt, mother of 3, wife of 1, gifted writer. I love the way you drew me into your chapter on lust. We'll get to that more. I didn't really know what you were doing for a minute. I thought, what is this about? And you caught me up. So thank you. My second guest, and we're going to be interacting all together, is Trent Casto, lead pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Naples, Florida. It's one of the leading churches in the southwestern side of Florida. Trent's written a couple of commentaries. I've had some role at working with him in those on 2 Corinthians, which is been out for a while, and Deuteronomy, which I think is going to come out really soon. It's kind of ironic that I asked and he said yes, or he volunteered, I can't remember, to write the chapter on sloth, because he's one of the least slothful people I've ever met. I thought he's a marathoner and he plays an endurance sport, tennis, singles, and then being a pastor, of course, these are anti-sloth devices. Nonetheless, you wrote a chapter on sloth. Would each of you just say a word on your angle on your chapter, Chris? We don't usually think that women should write about lust. You kind of volunteered to do it.
Yeah, that's why.
Give us your angle, why you wanted to do that. Trent, I'll ask you the same question in a minute.
Yeah, I think, I didn't exactly volunteer. You volunteered me, but it's because I said to you, if you're going to have women write in this book, you need a woman to write lust, because most of the resources that I have at least seen or heard people talk about in the church that surround lust are written by men, written for men. And there's all these women out here who are hiding because they're like, oh, well, sure, I must be a weirdo because nobody writes to me, speaks about me. So, and you were like, great, it's yours. And I was like, oh, no.
Well, I did, curiously, I had a conversation with a campus minister 4 days ago, in which he said, people think that lust is a problem for men, and I have all these women on campus who think there must be something, exactly your words, I must be terrible because I actually have problems with lust myself. And nobody ever talks about it as if women don't have a problem, but I do. I should probably point out, I didn't say this explicitly, that you two both contributed chapters to a book that I edited and contributed to myself called The Death of the Deadly Sins. It's a perspective on the deadly sins, but more on the virtues that drive them out. And so for you, Chris, it was love drives out lust.
Yes. And specifically self-controlled love. Yes.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Trent, you wrote a chapter called Sloth to Diligence. Tell us about your chapter and how on earth could you write about it, given that you are not a slothful person, or at least you certainly don't seem to be. Tell us your angle.
Yeah, it's a tricky sin, and it's somewhat difficult to nail down, really. But I knew that this is a major issue for me. So that's what's so deceiving, or what's so tricky about sloth, is that it can affect people who we don't traditionally recognize as being lazy or just unproductive. And I think in the course of my ministry as a pastor, I feel like I run into this sin, or I feel this sin at work in myself as much as any other that I deal with. And sometimes, as we'll get into later in the discussion, sometimes the busyness and the activity is actually one of the fruits of sloth that makes it difficult to see the sin that's at work underneath the surface. So I was excited to write this chapter because I know it's a real challenge, a real problem for me. Perhaps alongside of lust, and Christine's treatment of lust in that chapter was really, really well done. But I think, these are two of the sins that are perhaps the most difficult to root out of ourselves in this particular cultural moment that we're living in now.
Well, I wrote the chapter on gluttony, and I got to tell you, it was so convicting. But, of the marks of gluttony, I've got 3 of the big 5. And people don't believe me, but it's true. I don't lack the signs. I have them, 3 of the 5. So let's go into more detail. Chris, really, you are a good, gifted writer, and I thank you for that. It's a pleasure to read your work, but apart from the sheer pleasure of it, you say desire is good early in the chapter. And if desire is good, why is lust bad?
Yeah, I think Christians should think about desire as good because it's given to us by God. Like if we're human, we're going to have desire, and that's not a bad thing. But I think the question is, where do you direct the desire? What's it for? And is it a desire for God? Obviously, the 10 Commandments will order our desire, or is it a disordered desire? That's all these other things that God doesn't want us to have. And that's when we get in trouble, right? Is when the desire for all these good things, which is good desire, eclipses our desire for or love for God. Then we're talking about lust, and which gets dangerous. So It's not that desire is a bad thing. Desire is actually at the heart, I would say, of our faith, but desire for what?
Yeah. I mean, you could almost say if you don't have desire, you don't have anything. You would just lie in bed all day.
That's right.
Or sit in a chair and stare at the clouds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we'd be talking to Trent about sloth.
Well, and I certainly agree with the concept that the 10 Commandments tell us about disorder, don't they? I mean, what's murder? It's disorder. Desire for justice becomes vengeance. Adultery is certainly, it's a proper sexual desire and an improper sexual desire. 8th commandment, stealing is obviously desire for things. It's not wrong to have things, but you desire it in the wrong way. Is there anything more to it than that? Do you want to define lust for us?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, at the core, it's disordered desire, but it's a desire for something that's out of bounds. It's not supposed to be something that we have this access to, or this need for, this hold on. So it's this appetite that is disordered or dysfunctional, distorted. It's all the dis words, I would say. I think sometimes it's easier to think of examples because when I think about, when I think about lust, all I think about is sex, because we've talked about it that way so much. But I think if you think about, I was thinking specifically, say there's, especially for women, say there's this couch that you really, really love and you have had your eye on it and you go back to the website like 2 or 3 times a day just to think about how I'm just thinking about my own people and what we think and talk about. You go back to it and think about what would that look like with this in my living room? And you know that you're not going to buy it. You can't afford it. You and your husband have talked about it, but you keep going back to it over and over. And you think about how that would accent this other piece of furniture you have.
And how it would make your whole house look awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe,
and
or
your
whole kitchen or something.
Like everything would feel better and your children wouldn't be so cruel to you. And, you'd be skinnier and everything. Like this couch is going to fix everything. You know what I mean? Like when you cross that line, that's lust. And we don't think about lust that way, but you've moved into a disordered place.
I want to get Trent to comment because we've agreed that we're going to comment on each other's chapters, but I really I'm just going to shift a little and say, I love your little section on lust for control. So certainly it fits to say lust is a disordered desire for someone else's spouse or to have someone else's body when you're not married to that person. That's easy. Yeah. That's clear. To say that, what's wrong with control? How can you have lust for control? That's one of your big points.
Because I think it's again, we've talked so much to men about lust, which is great. We should. And there are lots of women who struggle with the same form of lust, right? There are tons of women who use pornography, right? But also I feel like that we speaking for women, not all of us, obviously, but we have this lust for control that is exhibited. And especially I feel like where I've seen it in myself and others is this, we want to control our people. So our husbands, our children, we want them to make us look good. We want people to think the right thing about us, how they act because they're related to us. And influence isn't bad, right? We're supposed to have influence over our husband. We're supposed to form our children, have influence over our husband. That's not a bad thing. But when you get to the point where you are shushing them, or I'm just thinking about my own life, or things I've seen my friends do, or saying to them, now we're going to enter this situation. I don't want you to talk about X, Y, Z. That
Oh,
is
yeah,
a
yeah.
form of control that
Yeah,
we're not meant to have.
yeah, that's
And
right.
and I think it's pretty common.
Yeah, I agree with you. In our family, my wife does not tell me that. She probably knows it's hopeless. She does tell me, make sure you say so and so, tell so and so this and this. You have to tell this person this. I'm like, I'm not sure I can do that. No, you have to do it. It's not severe, but it is a form of control. I think, Trent, you've been patient for a little bit. You want to comment on any of this? What do you have to say?
Right. I was thinking about as she was describing the couch situation. I thought, oh, what an odd thing to have a strange desire for. But as I was silently judging Christine and her friends in my heart, I recalled how, over the last few weeks, I've sort of secretly been spending time on my computer, lusting after a particular car that I just feel like I really need to have. And I've already decided financially it's a foolish decision. I don't need it. I've got a great car that I'm happy with. But boy, I really want this thing. And I do just keep going back to the internet to look at it and to look at more pictures of it inside and outside. I haven't thought of that particularly as a lust related problem, but it is something similar happening in the heart there as what we more traditionally think of as lust.
Yeah, a disordered desire, excessive desire for something that, with regard to a car, it isn't something you have no right to have, but
Right.
it would be harmful to your overall family health or finances or whatever to have that thing. So it's not the most intense form, but I think it fits.
Especially when you think about what Jesus does with the law. I've been thinking about this lately, that he'll say, he'll take what was do not kill, but, Jesus expands it and he's talking about anger and you call your brother a fool. And I'm like, ooh, what does that mean about lust? He says, it's just that expansion brings it to a place where like, yeah, I'm thinking about what do I keep going back to on the internet? What is that thing?
That's good. What would you say, Chris, is the root cause of lust?
You could talk about it a couple different ways, but I think at the core, it's this lack of trust in God. Because what it does is says, you're not going to give me what I need. I'm not going to get what's good for me. So I got to be in charge and take it. And so it's this disbelief, unbelief that he's going to give me what I need or what's good for me at the core.
If you have somebody listening right now and they're maybe mildly skeptical like Trent was until 3 minutes ago, and they're wondering, do I have the marks of lust? Obviously, sexual lust is pretty straightforward. If you're ogling men or women, if you're looking at porn or quasi porn, like, outfits that are very skimpy or whatever, that's clear. But how would you help somebody identify that they might possibly have lust? What marks would you put them to?
Yeah, I'd say one helpful sort of diagnostic is thinking about the opposite, which is contentment. So are you content with X? For me, I'm not thinking about couches, but I love to look at houses. And I think I've had periods where I've had to just stop. Like, I am not allowing myself to be on realtor.com because the more I look, the less content I am with my own house. And so, which, like, my house is fine. So are you in a place where you could say it with your marriage, with your clothing, with your friendships at work, whatever it is, could you characterize yourself as content, meaning with God? Like, these are the gifts he's given me, I'm content. I think another one would be anxiety. Like, are you grasping for these other things because you think, oh, this is actually what I need and God hasn't given it to me, so I got to figure out how to do it? Or is there that anxiety about getting myself what I need?
Life will be good if I have this thing.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to get Trent in a second again, but how do we break the power of lust?
Well, I would say first, and I think lots of times we think about these things upside down. So we think, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. I'm going to cancel my Sports Illustrated. I'm going to not go to the gym because that woman always wears that sports bra that I really like. I'm going to not look at realtor.com. I'm going to whatever it is. But I think the first thing we have to do, which in my own life, this has been helpful for me, is to think like, why? I know this sounds really basic, but I'm a loved, saved child of God. And this God actually cares about me and knows what I need. Like, I think we have to start there, or else none of the other things are going to matter.
Well, we're surely going to agree with you that it's the heart first, and it's a trust that God has given me what I want. And that would apply to people who wish they had more gifts or a better career or a more attractive spouse or whatever you want. Like, this is the spouse, this is the career, this is the house. By the way, I like your house. I mean, your blue shirt goes nicely with the blue walls, and it's a lovely color. And you have little accents of white. I think it looks nice. But it is what God gave you. You wish for more. But it's also true. Isn't the opposite also true that, we say, there's a song I learned as a child, be careful, little eyes, what you see.
Yes.
And indulging in lust makes you more lustful. I mean, if you go back to that sofa, that porn site, that car over and over again, it doesn't satisfy your lust. It actually deepens it, inflames it. It's like drugs. Taking a drug doesn't satisfy you. It satisfies you for 5 minutes, and then you're worse than ever.
Right.
Isn't it a both and?
I think it is a both and. And that's one of the things in my chapter I talk about is neuroplasticity, which I just think is such a helpful thing that God has given us, that the fact that we can use it for ill, like we go back to that site over and over again. And we can also use it for good because our brains are changeable. So you can create grooves that are helpful, that are outside of these things, that you stop doing that and create other habits. That's really helpful. I think another thing about stopping is that you can't do it alone. Anybody you read who talks about lust will say, like, this is not a thing that you can do by yourself. You really need help. It's very hard. Things are entrenched. We get so many dopamine hits that you're going to need some help. And third, that you got to be brutally honest. Like, it's not going to change if you just talk about how like the surface stuff, or if you're just talking about what you feel like are the more palatable things. Like, it's easy for me to talk about realtor.com because lots of people look at realtor.com. But if you only talk about those things and
the easy things, the safe things.
And don't talk about whatever it is that's in the corner of your heart that feels real shameful, then none of that's going to change. Yeah.
I'm reading another book about body and spirit and neuroplasticity. It's a wonderful book. But there's this little line that says the neurons that fire together, wire together. Which I think is a great summary. That is to say, the more you fire a certain neuron, the neuron of thanks, praise, practically speaking, if I get unhappy with some feature of my spouse or my child or my friend, praise your child, praise your spouse, praise your friend, give thanks. And that's a new wiring instead of the negative. They're not what I want right now. For sure. Even if you don't feel it. That's why I think reading about neuroplasticity has helped me understand why sometimes you fake it till you make it, and you can make it, is because that it's changing your brain, right? Right. Trent, what's your contribution to this conversation?
It's so interesting that I think lust is often a place where we go, or that manifests itself when we're starved for love, when we're not conscious of being loved, or we're not consciously loving God or others. And so lust becomes this substitute, frequently an escape. And that's why I think I think lust is often a way that when we are actually wrestling with sloth, lust becomes sort of an on-ramp into another kind of sin. I think they're pretty deeply connected, but because I think sloth ultimately has to do with love as well. So I think what Christine said is spot on. To deal with any sin, but lust particularly, it's not something you fight alone. It's something you fight in community. It's something you fight by being in relationships that are characterized by love, by being seen, by being willing to be seen, and experiencing love, by loving others after you see them and they share themselves with you. And I think maybe just one other thing I would add to it is that lust we take very seriously, and it is a deadly sin. It will ruin us and our lives and so on if we don't deal with it. But because it is so shameful, we often do not want to share it, and we deal with it with a very heavy hand. And I was just thinking, I wonder if we ought not to treat it with more of a sense of mocking, as we confess our, I was sharing about my car in a kind of a laughing way about it, or about the house. And I almost wonder if that takes a little bit of the shame of it, because we recognize this is a defeated sin. Christ has paid for this already. I don't have to continue bearing the shame of it and the condemnation or even the fear of it, because he's defeated this thing. I can while taking it seriously, I can also laugh at it and say, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think that certainly with regard to sloth, the Bible laughs at the sluggard.
Mm-hmm.
He says, there's a lion in the streets. I can't leave today. It's a little bit like saying, I can't drive to work today because there may be a terrible accident. Well, I mean, there could be. But if that's your approach, you will never leave your house. And it's absurd. We don't perceive it that way. And the picture of a sluggard, turning like a door on its hinges, the person who it's 7:00 and they're on their belly, and then it's 7:30 and they're on their back, and it's 8:00 and they're on their left side. And it's funny. You laugh it away. You say, this is absurd. And I have had Christian men, when they're near somebody who's making lustful remarks about women, tell the guy when he's, whistling it mentally or saying something about an attractive woman, I mean, you really think she'd go for you, bro? I mean, you think this is there any realism in your mind at all? I mean, she's 5'8" and 127 pounds, and you're 5'5" and 192 pounds. This just isn't going to happen. And by the way, she's 27 and you're 51. So it's also not going to happen. And you're unemployed. So there is a place for laughing at our sinful tendencies. So I agree with that. Let me go back to questions I want to talk about a little bit. Chris, so this is a Faith and Work podcast. Do you think lust has any role in the workplace? Obviously, you don't want to harass people in the workplace, but is this an issue at work? This is anything to do with faith and work?
Yes.
How so?
Two ways, I would say. One is that it's not just sexual lust. It's especially in a workplace. I think there's lust for control. There's also lust for power. There's lust for you could call this power, but a reputation, and that you want everybody to notice how great you are at your work. And when that is taking over as your only motivation, that's going to make everything more complicated. So there's that. I would also say, so if lust is a counterfeit desire or an over desire or a misdirected desire, then there should be desire in work. And what does that look like? Is it desire to serve, desire for excellence? All those things are good desires. So not only do they distract, but you're also taking away from the rightly ordered, in place desire that we're working for in work, right? That's not a bad thing. So I think we always have to remember, it's not just that we're trying to get rid of these things. It's where are we directing them? What's the shape of them, the form? What's the purpose? It's not that we just we're not supposed to be empty at the end. We're supposed to face the right direction.
So let's just imagine for a minute, let's just take a sports situation. There's somebody who thinks they're a great wide receiver and they're going to catch the ball and they're really fast and they can break through tacklers after the catch. And you know what? They're actually right. And they would be a great wide receiver, and their team would be better if they were the wide receiver. And they have a desire to be the starting wide receiver. But there's somebody else there ahead of them, and they know that player is not as good as they are. And they could they say when that wide receiver drops 3 passes in one game, good. Now I'm going to get on the field and I'm going to be better. And yes, it sounds so selfish, but our team will actually do better. For the sake of the team, I need to be out there. Now, I'm deliberately painting an awkward scenario, but I paint it to say a desire to be recognized can be very selfish, but it can be good for the whole. There's somebody ahead of me in this organization, or somebody's viewed as the engineer, the designer, the salesperson. I really am better. And it will be good if I'm recognized. Yeah, maybe there's a selfish element, but for the sake of the whole, it'll be better if I start fulfilling this role that is being fulfilled poorly right now. Trent, what do you think?
Sure.
Am I just deluding myself, putting good motives where there are bad ones?
No, I think you're absolutely right. If you're Christian McCaffrey, you should be calling for the football on every play because
right.
It's better in your hands than anybody else's. But it is something I think that a person has to know their own heart and what's driving this. Is this really in the interest of my team, or is this in my own interest?
Yeah. Hey, we did talk about lust from a female perspective, but do you want to say anything from a male perspective? And Chris, if you have one more word you want to say, you can. Again, I loved your picture of Potiphar's wife. Hey, buy the book and you get to read it. Trent, any words on lust from the male perspective, the sexual side, especially something we haven't said that you think needs to be said?
Yeah, well, I think we have already touched on it, but I mean, the heart of the issue is the same, whether you're male or female. The heart of what lust is, this inordinate desire, this over desire, is the same. How it manifests itself, and maybe the way that that we experience it does vary a little bit. We know that men tend to be more visually stimulated, whereas generally women tend to be more emotionally or mentally charged, and those are not exclusive categories, of course. But so I think for men we do have to be intentional, even while embracing the identity of who we are in Christ is at the core of overcoming lust and moving toward real love. Practically, we do have to be careful what we're letting in, where we're going, what's happening with our eyes. And that's where, and I think Christine refers to this in the chapter. This is where being intentional about, maybe we need some kind of filtering software, accountability software that allows others to see what we're seeing, so that we're not deceiving ourselves, what we're doing with our eyes. I think the importance of community in overcoming this sin, not allowing shame to cause us to retreat into ourselves and think that, I've been wrestling with this for 25 years, but I'm sure I'm going to get over it by myself. We have to put that away and say, no, we need to get real with some people and allow some people to get real with us so we can overcome this together. I've seen some beautiful examples of that in our church context, and I've experienced the benefit of that myself. It's a beautiful thing to be in real Christian community with real love.
Speaking of neuroplasticity, I mean, one of the best ways that we grow as Christians is by watching somebody else who's maybe a little bit ahead of us or struggle with the same issue, and they have an insight, they have a story to tell. And especially in intense, respectful, loving, kind relationships, we change, we grow. Thanks. That was spoken like a true pastor. Okay, Trent, although you wrap this up, I'll give Chris, was there one more thing you wanted to say, or is it time to turn to the topic of diligence?
I would just say, the more, going back to women, the more you can, especially if you're a pastor or somebody who is lots of people are listening to, the more you can normalize the fact that women struggle with lust, the better, because that just allows conversations to happen. And then suddenly people are coming out of corners that they've been stuck in and stuck in shame, like you were talking about. So I think the more, however you talk about it, is just going to help.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like talking about divorce explicitly for the first time in a church in 5 years, or child abuse or drug addiction. Whatever you talk about, if you've neglected it for a while, people are saying, oh, thank you. Thank you. So that's a great word. All right, Trent, what is sloth? Can you tell us what it is?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay. Well, listen, if you don't want to, you can tell us what Evagrius of Pontus and John Cassian had to say, since you cite them and they're experts in the field.
Yeah, well, I do have a definition, but I feel like it's constantly being tweaked. I keep reading on this topic because it fascinates me, because I know it's at work in me, and yet as I've looked at the history of how this has been treated in the church, there's just all these nuances, and it's very hard to put your finger on it. As soon as you put your finger on it, it's like you realize, well, there's something else that's not quite there, and that comes all the way down to the fact that we can't really decide the right word even to describe what we're talking about. And so historically, when Evagrius, who really is the first one to put this on the map as one of the central sins that we had to deal with, he called it acedia, which came from a Greek word that means lack of care. And he doesn't spend a lot of time defining it, but he does give a number of examples. And the examples are pretty interesting, but in some ways they feel pretty removed from us, because he's one of these desert fathers who's moved out into the wilderness to live on his own, along with other people like him. And so in some ways, people have thought about it as a sin that monks kind of deal with uniquely. But the reality is, it's not a unique problem to the monks. It's something that all of us have to deal with. But they had to, because of the removal of distractions from their lives, they had to come face to face with what was happening in their hearts in a way that we're able to frequently distract ourselves from. So after looking at how Evagrius deals with it, and then John Cassian and Pope Gregory and a number of others, Thomas Aquinas, I settled on the best definition I could, which doesn't capture all of it, but the best definition I could, and that is the failure or the refusal to do what love for God and love for neighbor require. So the title of my chapter is From Love to Diligence, but that's really only because Christine got from lust to love. Because I think
Right.
sloth really
Everybody
could be,
wanted love. Go ahead.
yes, love is so central to all of these, which is really interesting. The failure to do what love for God and love for neighbor requires. Calling it sloth, which we did for this chapter, is a little bit misleading. And that's why a lot of people who write on this subject insist on going with the word acedia, even though acedia means nothing to most people.
Right.
Because when we talk about sloth, we tend to reduce what we're talking about to laziness. And John Cassian, back in the 4th and 5th century, he's kind of responsible for the close association of acedia with laziness, but it really is a much broader concept than just laziness. And I do think recognizing it as a failure to do what love for God and love for neighbor requires, that can be because we're busy. We keep ourselves so busy that we don't have to do what love requires. It can be, the fruit of that can be laziness, like we just don't want to, and so we don't do what we should do. It can be rooted in a sort of a hopelessness. And in fact, one of the later spiritual writers who was talking about this actually left acedia off the list of the 7 capital vices or deadly sins, and replaced it with melancholy. And that's partly because melancholy can be a fruit of this acedia or sloth problem. So
yeah, I like the definition. You have me thinking of an ongoing issue in our house, and I do well sometimes and not well sometimes. And it is that we have a habit in our house. We have supper, and then we go for a walk. Then we read a little bit, read whatever the book is we're working on separately, and then we watch a show for maybe an hour. And then Debbie, who needs more sleep than I do, goes to bed, and I stay up and read or work on something that was half finished from earlier in the day. And I almost invariably get a little bit hungry around 10 or 10:30, and I get a snack out. And most of the time, I put the snack food and the dishes and the cup away. And sometimes I don't. And I could very easily say, but I had 11 emails I had to reply to, and they were strategic. And this person would have been upset if I didn't have it to them in the morning, and they deserved an answer. And so I didn't put the dishes away. But the truth of the matter is, putting the dishes away takes, like 30 seconds. And it's just what love requires, because it tells her that I love and respect her if I don't leave a mess. When she gets up in the morning, there's no dishes out. It's so simple, and it's so easy to make an excuse. I'm not lazy. I'm working hard. I'm working so hard, but I'm not doing what love requires. And your comments in your chapter kind of convicted me of that. And I may even be doing a little bit better because of your chapter.
That's good. One of the things too that I can't remember who made this clear. Maybe it was Evagrius himself, but it is a spiritual vice. And they make a distinction between spiritual vices and bodily vices.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's a spiritual vice that has bodily implications, but the real heart of the spiritual issue, and this was helpfully brought to light by Rebecca DeYoung, who wrote a great book on the vices as well, is that acedia makes us resistant to the change and the growth and the stretching and the giving of ourselves that real love requires. We don't want to become the new man that Christ is making us to be. And so we resist that. We resist the need to change. And that can then look like, it can manifest itself in all kinds of different ways. One of them as simple as, the new man wants to care for his wife by putting away the dishes, but the old man is quite content to be just like he is right now. I don't want to do it.
Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll get Chris to comment however she wishes. I'm sure she's got some thoughts. You do connect, Trent, the problem of acedia or sloth or improper care to 3 other things, which are hopelessness, which you mentioned briefly, laziness, it's not a clear relationship necessarily, to acedia, and busyness. And you and I talked a little bit before we started about the fact that acedia causes those, but they can also feed acedia or lack of care. We talked a little bit about how laziness makes us not be busy sometimes, but also people hide their laziness or indifference by being hyper busy at easy things. So let me just invite you to comment in whatever way you want on hopelessness, laziness, busyness. And then Chris, just pop in when he's done and talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Maybe the best way for me to talk about this is just to give you an example from my own life. And that is the place where I just head into acedia every single week is with regard to sermon preparation. So as a pastor, one of my main tasks every week that love for God and love for my neighbor requires is that I sit myself down in my study and I open my books and I get into prayer and I think about what does this text say? What does it mean for these people? How do I communicate it in a way that benefits them and glorifies God? And in the process of doing that, every single week, I experience hopelessness, I experience laziness, I experience busyness, and a whole lot of other things, despair, all this whole range of things, all of which militate against doing what love for God and love for neighbor requires. I sit down with a difficult text and I think this is hopeless. I'm never going to be able to think of some way to be able to communicate this that is going to make sense to people, is going to help them. And that hopelessness then spins itself out but I can write a pretty good email right now and I can clear my desk off.
It's busyness, right.
I could go browse that car that I really want to have and don't need to have. That then manifests itself in procrastination. And at the heart of it is this refusal to sit in my chair and do what love for God and neighbor requires, which is hard. It is the difficult thing. And that's why I think the virtues that drive out acedia are love and perseverance and diligence. When Christ's love compels me to give myself to this work for the people that I care about and for the God that I love. And that also enables me to persevere in a difficult task that feels like it should be easier than it is, but it's not. But I refuse to run, and I refuse to escape, and I refuse to turn to the sins that may give me a sense of comfort, and then remaining diligent. And I can't remember. I meant to look this up, but diligence, I think its root is with a Latin word that actually is pretty closely connected to love. But this intentional diligence, when we do this, we find we get through to the other side. And the Desert Fathers used to say, when you get to the other side of this sin, there's not another one on its heels. You actually do have a sense of peace and a sense of contentment, for a time.
Chris, I know I said you're next, but I got to say something. I had a guest about 2 years ago, Kelly Kapik, who wrote a book about the beauty of limits. And I think he says something, connect the mind, body, spirit. The human body, there's a book called Deep Work also, which I read a few years ago, that points out that the human body is probably not capable, very few people are capable of concentrating truly deeply on something difficult, like how do I translate this text, ferret out the exact meaning, and then communicate in a way that's accessible to 11-year-olds, 51-year-olds, and 81-year-olds, which is what we have to do. And Chris, I know you wrestle with the same thing. And the typical human can go at that 90 minutes, and then you're exhausted. And you can do it, the typical human, even well trained, even the person who sets aside distractions, can probably do that 3 times a day. And you simply cannot. People say, I write all day long. No, you don't. You daydream here and there in that period of time. So to recognize creaturely limits, if Kelly were with us, he would probably say that. But Chris, you are with us right now. What do you want to say?
I was just thinking, I was laughing when Trent was talking because the number of times I have cleaned this office when I sit down to write a chapter or start an outline, I cannot tell. It's embarrassing because exactly what you're saying. Every time I do it, sit down to write, whether I'm writing a talk for a women's retreat or a chapter, is every time. It's suddenly my desk has to be clean and I might need to order a couple new things on Amazon. I mean, it's like you could clock me, that's exactly what you said. Yes. And reading your chapter, about the same thing.
It's like children who don't want to take a bath or shower.
Yeah.
Like you just stall and stall and stall, like, because we don't want to work hard mentally. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. I thought the same thing though about that. What comes right in front of my face is Jesus' commandments, which are hard. They are hard. It is hard to love your enemy. And man, I can think of other things to do to put that off. I really can, especially if they're living in your house, and sometimes our enemies are living in our houses, and man, that's hard. But I have a question for you, Trent. I would love to know. I'm currently writing a book with my co-writer that she's a therapist. We're writing a book about anxiety, depression. I'm like the biblical theology of mental illness, and I would love to know what do you think acedia has to do with depression? Or how do they dovetail? Like talking about melancholy, which is different than depression, but I just want to hear you say words about it.
There is a lot out there on this topic, and I not really well versed on it, except to say that I could just talk about my own experience again. I find that my sense of melancholy grows as I refuse to do the things that love for God and love for neighbor requires. A person who has no idea what day of the week it is, but who's watched me over the course of time can tell if it's a Thursday or a Monday based on how my mood, my temperament, my family can tell. If I'm caving to acedia over the course of the week, I just get in this funk, and then that becomes this kind of
Spiral.
Spiral, exactly. And
Yeah.
and that's true. That can be that's the case for if I'm not loving my wife in the way that I should, that has a consequence. There's a consequence to that. I begin to experience and I may not I may not be able to trace directly from point A to B why I'm feeling this general sense of heaviness or despair or of gloom. But I do think frequently we can track it back to I'm not I'm not doing the thing that love requires. I'm not doing the thing that allows me to glorify and enjoy God, the very thing for which I was made. And it is different than the brain chemistry issue that is, associated with depression. It's not primarily a brain chemistry issue, although maybe it is. If we're not doing the things that loving ourself requires, like getting some exercise, getting some sunlight into our eyes.
Taking a shower. Yeah.
Right. So there is some overlap, I guess, between the spiritual and the mental for sure.
This conversation is helping me change something. So for years, I've said sin makes us stupid. That is to say, we do idiotic things. What on earth made you think that would work? What made you think that yelling at your child would be helpful for your relationship with your child? That's just a bad idea. So sin makes us sad, but sin makes us stupid. Sin makes us sad, I'm thinking. And even as you're saying this, when I treat other people poorly, which I did about a week ago, I was exhausted and I'd just gotten 3 pieces of bad news. And this person wanted a whole bunch from me that I did not want to give them. And then I ended up saying something I shouldn't have said. And then I felt depressed about it for the next day. So sin makes us sad.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Yes.
We don't like ourselves in the way we go. Thanks for that question, Chris. One of the comments in your chapter I really liked, Trent, is your statement that I don't want to be successful at the wrong things. Or you warned about the danger of success at the wrong things. What on earth does that mean? Does it mean you don't want to be good at shuffling cards because it's a signal of a misspent youth? What does it mean?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times if our orienting question in our mind every day is not what does love for God and love for neighbor require, then we may find ourselves devoting our days to doing things that may feel personally satisfying or that move us up the corporate ladder or that help us feel like we have a sense of accomplishment. And so we're very successful at that, but it doesn't matter if the measuring stick is, but what does love for God and my neighbor require right here and now? And so, when we think about the marketplace, it may be the case that a person is only thinking about their neighbor as their coworker and their team and their company and helping elevate the stock price and so on. And they're failing to think about the fact that actually what love for neighbor requires right now is that you engage in a conversation with your teenage son, or that you actually leave work at this time, or you don't open the email again in the evening and engage in a conversation with your wife. So it requires us, I think, to have a sense of what our roles are, where our priorities are, and then asking that question, all right, given who I am, what my calling is, where I am in this particular moment, what does love for God require? What does love for my neighbor require? Sometimes that means closing the door. I need to actually close the door to people and be alone and still with God. That's what love requires in this moment. And sometimes it means I need to open the door and put away my book and engage with the person in front of me. So I think if that's our orienting question, I think we're less likely to find ourselves building a life in the pursuit of success in things that don't matter.
I'm going to let you both comment on this, okay? So we agree that love drives out sloth. You, of course, say diligence. I think you're right. Diligence is a form of love. That is, it's giving yourself intensely to something that is good for your relationship with God or your love of your neighbor. How does love drive out sloth?
I would say the easiest place for me to apply this as you're talking is I have a 14-year-old adopted son who was a drug baby. So he has we say he has all the letters. He has ADD, ODD, autism, all the things. He has a lot of behavior issues. And so when I think about loving him and thinking about diligence, when I'm talking about enemies, he is often my enemy. I regularly call the police. He's bigger than me. He's violent. And I'm like, what is loving him look like? And how do I avoid sloth with him, which I am very good at, by the way, and well practiced. And I think a couple of things. I think what drives that out is self-control, which has to be from the Spirit, because it's just so much
Can
easier.
I just say, so you don't really mean self-control?
No.
You mean restraint.
I mean restraint. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. Because we can't control ourselves by grit.
Right. No. Right. And I guess I also think long suffering. That because when I think about the difficulty of loving hard people, I think of the relentlessness of some relationships. And what we need is to keep coming back and doing it over and over and over. That's long suffering. So those things feel like sort of like the weapons, for lack of a better term, to pick up against my tendency towards sloth.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the fact that you have adopted a child who's difficult. And, diligence and love go hand in hand when you have a difficult child. And honestly, so many people listening to this are good parents who have difficult children, whatever the cause may be. Thank you for sharing. Trent, what do you want to say?
That point about perseverance or long suffering is key, and again, that's something that our Christian brothers from way back recognized is a key part of overcoming acedia, and that is to be faithful day after day to what it is that God has called us to do, and not to flee from that, not to run from that, or try to escape from that. It doesn't mean we can't rest or have periods of respite where the pressure of that isn't on us, but this love for God and neighbor, in this case a child, is what allows us to keep moving into that situation and to keep engaging in such a way that we're still working for their best interest. And I was thinking about an example of marriage. You in a good marriage, you still have these issues that come up time and time again, and you could be married for 20 years or 40 years, and the fight may come back to the same thing again, and you're in different rooms, and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, like, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I need to do, but I don't want to. I don't want to do what love requires right now. I don't want to go say, I'm sorry. I don't want to go own my part of this. I don't want to go take responsibility. And that's, among other things, that's acedia at work in us. Doesn't want us, we don't want to experience the change that loving somebody calls for from us. We don't want to step into that new creation that God is causing us to become. I want to be the old man who just sits in bitterness over, the ways I feel like I've been wronged. And to recognize that's one of the things at play here when I'm sitting there brooding and not wanting to be reconciled. Say, no, this love calls for this, and it's not hopeless. Every time we go through this process of reconciliation, it's saying, I'm sorry, and owning, God is using that to keep making us the new person He's creating us to be in Christ. It's not hopeless. It's not fruitless. It's actually, this is His process, and we can't let acedia get in the way.
That's good. So I hear you saying that diligence is the form of love that keeps pressing us to live the life that is ours, a life of peace, reconciliation, whatever form of love is required of us at the moment. All right, we've had a good long conversation. I'm going to ask each of you one question, and it's a really hard one because you have 30 seconds to answer it. Okay? All right, somebody bumps into you and they say, "Oh, Chris Gordon, I read that chapter by you. But I forget everything I read. What is the one thing I should remember from your chapter?" You're walking down the sidewalk for 30 seconds. What's the one thing you want people to take away from your chapter? Trent, same question is coming for you in a second.
God made desire. It's not bad.
Okay. All right.
Stop trying to get rid of desire.
Okay.
Instead, direct it to the right thing.
Okay, good. I like it. All right. Trent?
Thanks for going first, Chris. I appreciate the extra time. The thing I would say is, by His grace, God has saved you, and He's making you a new person. And yet acedia is at work against you to keep you from becoming that new person. Therefore, the orienting question we want to approach our days with is, because I've been loved, because I've been rescued by God, what does love for Him and love for my neighbor require that He's going to use to keep shaping me into that new person He's creating me to be? Don't let acedia rob you of that.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, brother and sister. It's been great talking to both of you. You're two of my favorite conversation partners, and you proved it again today. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.